Good evening, everybody. We're so grateful to have you all here with us this evening as we gather a wonderful panel to discuss what is happening on the ground in Ukraine, especially as it relates to the plight of the Jewish community there in Eastern Europe and in Ukraine itself. It is remarkable to be convening this program on this evening after the commemoration of Purim. Purim is in many ways a commemoration of the precarious nature of what it is to be a Jew in the diaspora. And there are times when the Jewish people over our history have enjoyed remarkable safety and security and prosperity in our lives outside of the land of Israel. And there are times when that safety and security has been threatened and when our lives are literally at stake and are questioned. In a conversation with Rabbi Yehuda Kurtzer, Rabbi David Beshevkin, who is the Director of Education for NCSY, talked about what it is that we're supposed to learn from the story of Esther and how it relates to the lives we lead. Of course, the story of Esther is an enigma in the Torah. It doesn't reference God or the land of Israel at all. But what he suggested was that we learn in that story, we learn in the story that was read by Jews all over the world today, that God's presence is found through the agency of Jews looking out after other Jews, in the ways in which we care for ourselves and work to preserve life and limb and the spiritual heritage of our people, even in moments when life itself is in a precarious and precipitous crisis. And so today, how ironic it is that we read this story of a Jewish community in turmoil and in danger at the same time that we witness Jewish communities in turmoil and in danger. And at the same time, how remarkable it is that we're also able to see the magnanimity of God's presence exercised through the agency of other Jews who are working tirelessly to help not just the Jewish refugees, but the nearly 3 million refugees, if not more, who have fled their homes in Ukraine because of the terrible war perpetrated by Vladimir Putin on a sovereign nation. We are absolutely blessed this evening to have a remarkable panel, and I'm going to turn to my very good friend, Jim Schiller, who will
First, I want to thank Temple Bethel for making this program possible. Mark Levin is the Executive Vice Chairman and CEO of NCSEJ, the National Coalition Supporting Eurasian Jewry. He is one of the organized Jewish community's leading experts on national and international political affairs. Mark has been working almost 24/6, keeping in constant contact with the Ukrainian Embassy, the Israeli Embassy, and the State Department, as well as the Jewish community in Ukraine. Mark travels extensively throughout the former Soviet region on a frequent basis. He also serves on the Executive Committee of the World Jewish Restoration Organization. Mark has served as a public member of the U.S. delegation to meetings of the Organization on Security and Cooperation in Europe, and served as a public advisor for the U.S. delegation to the Berlin Conference on Anti-Semitism. Mark made his first trip to Russia in 1982, leading a congressional delegation to meet with Soviet officials and Jewish activists. It is my honor to introduce my friend and my partner at NCSEJ, Mark Levin.
Jim, thank you very much for that introduction. For those that don't know, Jim is actually the chair of NCSEJ. And besides being a friend, he's also my boss. So I'm a bit on the spot here tonight. But what I want to do is talk about what's been happening, why it was happening, and what the impact is on the Jewish community. As you heard, NCSEJ is an advocacy organization, and we focus on ensuring the well-being of Jewish communities in the former Soviet Union and parts of Eastern Europe. It is now a little past midnight in Ukraine. While most of the world continues to try to figure out what is Putin's endgame, Ukrainians have survived another day of the invasion. They have heart-wrenching discussions about whether to stay where they are, and believe it or not, there are still many Ukrainians sheltering in place or attempting to leave for a safer place, and whether to divide their families by having women and children cross the border into neighboring countries. You heard that almost 3 million people have crossed the border. What you may not realize is that the men between the ages of 18 and 60 are not able to cross the border because the Ukrainian army is looking for more people to help defend the country. This also includes NCSEJ's Ukrainian representative, who had to evacuate his family from Ukraine to Lviv. These are just a few of the life and death conversations that have been taking place throughout Ukraine over the last 4 weeks. Leading up to the invasion, I was repeatedly asked one question: will Russia invade Ukraine? My response was always the same: there is only one person who can answer that question, and he is insane. But unfortunately, we've seen what's happened in the last 4 weeks. The question that we get asked most often now is, what is Putin's endgame? And unfortunately, my response continues to be the same. There's only one person who knows the answer to that, and he hasn't communicated what he actually wants to achieve. Does he want to take control of the whole country? Does he want to take control of most of the country and leave a western part, in essence, splitting the country, not in two, but in controlling 75% of the country and leaving 25% of Western Ukraine as almost a free and open area? But one thing is that we do know for sure is that the lessons that he applied, unfortunately, in Syria and many years before in Grozny, Chechnya, he's applying again, once again, in Ukraine, where we've seen a massive amount of destruction, civilians being targeted. I think all of our hearts broke when we saw the maternity hospital that was attacked for no good reason. And this is happening over and over again every day. The other point that I always made before the invasion, and it's even more true today, is that Putin has done more, or had done more, to unite Ukraine than any Ukrainian political leader had done over the last 30 years until President Zelensky's courageous leadership over the last month. I say this because that Ukraine was a country divided in two, if not more, by different political factions, ideologies, and other concerns. Today, it is one country united behind a goal to maintain their independence, and that includes the large, significant Jewish population in Ukraine. Now, there's one thing I'd like to lay out and talk about now is one of the more aggressive justifications Vladimir Putin has used for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And he and his cohorts continue to talk about this every day. And I'm sure you heard about his comments, and have watched him say directly about how one of Russia's goals is to denazify Ukraine. Well, this allegation that Ukraine is being led by a fascist, neo-Nazi, and anti-Semitic government has no basis of fact. Please remember that this is not something new. The Russians have used this line of argument for years. It was part of their justification for taking over Crimea and part of eastern Ukraine that's known as the Donbass. Ukraine is led, as we all know, by a Jewish president. But what most people don't realize is that the defense minister in Ukraine today is also Jewish. The president, the chief of staff, the president's chief of staff is Jewish. At one point, Ukraine not only had a Jewish president, but also a Jewish prime minister. There's only one other country in the world that can say that today. In the last 3 months, the Ukrainian parliament passed 2 major pieces of legislation on combating anti-Semitism. One based on the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition on anti-Semitism. Earlier this year, the United States and Ukraine signed a new memorandum of understanding that contains language on combating anti-Semitism. In one of the recent Pew Charitable Trust polls on how Europeans view their Jewish neighbors, Ukraine recorded one of the lowest levels of any country in Europe, and that includes Western Europe. In fact, one of the great ironies is that some of the highest levels of negative views toward Jewish neighbors in Europe are actually held by people living in the countries in Western Europe. I'm not here to suggest that Ukraine is perfect. We have continually raised issues related to the historical narrative of World War II, the honoring of individuals and groups who were responsible for the killing of Jews before and during the Holocaust. The difference today is we've been able to raise these concerns with successive Ukrainian administrations and have actually made some progress. Last October, NCSEJ led a delegation chaired by Jim Schiller of American Jewish leaders to Kiev to participate in the 80th anniversary commemoration of the Babin Yar massacres that occurred during World War II. It was a significant event where the presidents of Ukraine, Israel, and Germany delivered speeches. You may remember at the beginning of the invasion by Russia, the territory of the Babin Yar Memorial was hit by Russian rockets. And this wasn't by accident. They say they were targeting a radio station, radio TV station complex and a radio tower. But if anybody knew the significance of this territory, it would be the Russians, because it was built under Soviet rule. And they knew exactly what they were doing. Anti-Semitism exists everywhere. And we've seen an incredible rise in anti-Semitism around the world, including in our own country. What matters is how a government responds and what it does to try to reduce future incidents. The Ukrainian government more than meets this test. There's been much speculation on why Putin decided to invade Ukraine. And some of it is, does he truly believe Ukraine is part of Russia or it's in its sphere of influence? Does he want to demonstrate Russia's military prowess, which isn't going very well? Does he not want NATO on its borders? Is he tired of Zelensky's continuing criticism of him, or so to speak, slings and arrows that Zelensky has directed toward Putin, not just over the last few weeks or months, but since he first became president? However, there's another reason that I believe has played a large part in Putin's thinking for over 15 years. And that is his personal animus toward the US in particular and the West in general. I've known and dealt with some of the senior Russian leadership for more than 20 years. They continue to nurse wounds based on what they believe is US arrogance, belittlement, and insults, and demeaning attitudes toward Russia. Where does that leave us? We need to ensure that the United States continues to do as much as possible to help support Ukraine and the Ukrainian Jewish community, whether it's through humanitarian assistance or security assistance. We are working and maintaining relations with Ukrainian, Jewish, and the US government, other governments in the area to provide support. I know we'll talk about this later on, but there are things that our community can continue to do in addition to providing needed financial support. What I'd like to just finish with is to talk a little bit about what existed before the invasion inside the Ukrainian Jewish community. This was becoming a significant Jewish community in the diaspora. There's an estimate of anywhere between 200 to over 300,000 Jews were living in Ukraine. This would make it one of the largest Jewish communities in the diaspora. What was also interesting, I talked a little bit about it before, but there is no state-sponsored anti-Semitism, and there's very little popular anti-Semitism. As I said, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but for the most part, it's under control. The Ukrainian Jewish community had everything that any other Jewish community could want anywhere in the diaspora. There are synagogues, community centers, hospitals, schools, and this all occurred over the last 30 years. This is something of great significance, and this is something that will be of a great loss if Mr. Putin succeeds in what appears to be the total destruction of Ukraine and Ukrainian society. There were even a number, even before the invasion, there were many international Jewish organizations that also had taken root in Ukraine. For example, the JDC, or the Joint Distribution Committee, was servicing tens of thousands of Jews from one end of Ukraine to the other. Jaffe, the Jewish agency, had summer camps and other types of program. World Ort were providing educational programming, and various religious streams had taken hold, from the Reform or Progressive through Orthodox, through the ultra-Orthodox. It was unfortunately truly remarkable, and it's a hope that maybe some remnants of this structure will be left after this conflict finally ends. I'd like to finish with one comment. Everything that's taken place in Ukraine over the last 30 years, everything that's taken place throughout the region of the former Soviet Union and parts of Eastern Europe, have taken place because of the political environment that has allowed the growth and development of Jewish communities throughout the region, including in Ukraine. If the political environment changes, who knows what will happen? And it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be an open and free or even democratic society, because unfortunately, in some of the most autocratic societies in this part of the world, there are substantial Jewish communities that have taken hold. But what happens after the invasion is anyone's guess. And what we need to do as a community, what we need to do as individuals right now, is to ensure that those groups and organizations that are on the ground, either inside Ukraine or on the other side of the border, continue to have the resources that they need to take care of medical needs, cultural, religious, but really the basic necessities of life. Try to put yourself in the place of somebody who less than a month ago was living in what they thought was a well-established city, participating in what we would consider normal day-to-day activities. And now their whole life has been turned upside down. What should give us a little bit of comfort is to know that the well-established organizations that many of us have supported over the years have the experience and knowledge and how to try to at least help people. There are hundreds of thousands of people in Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, and Moldova right now who don't know what's going to happen the next day. 2 days ago, Jim and I led a webinar where one of the chief rabbis of Ukraine said that he doesn't refer to the people who are leaving Ukraine as refugees. He calls them evacuees because most of these people want and expect to be able to come home one day. And it is our hope that we will be able to assist them in this effort. So let me thank the congregation again. Let me thank the leadership for providing me this opportunity. I look forward to the rest of the program and answering any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Mark. We will come back to you in a little while. We so appreciate the update. There is a prayer that is in the Rabbi's Manual that is a prayer for facing adversity. It begins with the words, and in so many times throughout history, our Jewish community is surrounded by uncertainty. And it ends with the words, we are a people blessed with perseverance, boldness, and fortitude. Help us to tap into these virtues. We in the clergy office at Temple Bethel have been a front row witness to someone whose life has lived through that uncertainty of Jewish history. So much of her life has been impacted by that. And we are firsthand witness to that same person who has exhibited boldness, perseverance, and fortitude. And that is Kira Malamed Vainberg, who is in our rabbinic office and is personally affected by all that is going on. Kira Malamed Vainberg was born in Ukraine and grew up there. In her teens, she worked at the Jewish Agency of Ukraine in youth groups and summer camps. When Kira made Aliyah to Israel in 2001, her parents moved from Zhytomyr to Kyiv, where her mother still lives today. Her sister has been living in Moscow for the past 30 years with her family. Kira moved to Florida in 2016 and has been working at and is a member of Temple Bethel since 2019. It is surreal to be every day with someone whose family is personally affected by the headlines of the news. And Kira is a noble and incredible woman who we are so appreciative is here with us on this Zoom tonight. Kira, I wanted to ask you to tell us about your family that is currently being affected by the war in Ukraine, including your mother's escape and the well-being of your family in Moscow. And then also share with us how you are keeping up to date on what's going on with them and how are you communicating?
Good evening and thank you, Rabbi Jessica. So I have a lot of longtime friends in Ukraine, but of course my main concern is my mother, who has been living alone in Kyiv since my dad passed away last year. For the first 10 days, she decided to stay in Kyiv, and when we spoke to her, we could actually hear bombings through the phone, and it was on a daily basis. And after that time, when we saw the convoy on the way to Kyiv, which stretched to, I think, between 30 and 60 miles, we decided that it was probably a time to leave, even though we knew how challenging it is for people to leave. So that's why she stayed for a while, because it was dangerous to stay home, but it was dangerous to leave as well. So eventually my mom went on a 2-day journey on 5 trains from Kyiv to Lviv, from Lviv to across the Polish border, which was very challenging in hot trains with no restrooms. They were standing for hours before the Polish border, but they were lucky because they were met by very kind volunteers on the border who provided them with necessities and food and even phone SIM cards. And eventually my mom made her way to Germany, where she has been staying with a family friend. And currently, just yesterday, she was provided a room in a dormitory where she's staying now. But of course, she and as well as my friends who are also evacuated, they're just dreaming to come back home.
And do you want to share about your sister in Moscow and also how you're communicating with everyone?
So thankfully the communication is good. My sister, so Russia right now is banning platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and even WhatsApp, because they're trying to prevent people from receiving the truthful information, unlike what people are being fed in Russia through mass media. We're keeping in touch several times a day. I also I'm able to track my mom's phone with an app, so I can see where she is at all times, which is very important to us. I also stay in touch with my friends this way.
Kira, thank you so much for sharing that update with us. And it's been so heart-wrenching to watch you and work with you every day and see the emotion that you carry on your face, and just know that, you know, our whole team is here and holding you up and supporting you, and that the whole synagogue is here for you in this moment. There is a teaching that comes from Pirkei Avot where Rabbi Hillel says, "B'makom she'ein anashim hishtadel lahiyot ish," in a place where there are no people, where there's no humanity, strive to be a human being. And the instruction was certainly about when you're a place when there is just evil and terrible things going on, but it also applies when no one knows what to do. And one of the reasons we're having this conversation tonight is because so many folks feel like they simply don't know what to do vis-a-vis Ukraine. But one member of our community, Maria Kemper-Reese, who was raised in Kyiv, has known exactly what to do all along and has done amazing, amazing things to help support the Ukrainian people. She immigrated to the U.S. in 1989 as a political refugee, and her family took a long journey as stateless folk through Austria, and then eventually to making their way to Italy and to the U.S. She came here in December of '89, and her family began their American dream. Graduating high school and going on to Baruch College, she went into a career in advertising where she did incredibly well, serving clients like Hershey's and other great organizations and great companies. In 2016, she retired to be with her family, her husband Brian and her sons Logan and Cooper. Cooper is anxiously awaiting his bar mitzvah in just a couple of weeks and has been very involved in local organizations in the PTA and fundraising efforts and the HOA boards. In her earlier life, she was a ballet dancer, and although she can't do that anymore, she continues to do hobbies like tennis and gardening. But since the invasion of Ukraine, she has been leading an effort to get supplies over to Ukraine. Maximizing some of the contacts she has with folks on the ground, she has led a medical supplies drive with the help of Amazon and Amazon registries. But we're going to now introduce Maria to talk about the work that she's done thus far, and also share a bit about what the next step might be, especially for those of us who are local to Boca Raton, and how we can help those on the ground in Ukraine. Maria, thank you so much for your work so far, and it's a pleasure to welcome you tonight.
Thank you, everyone. My efforts start with the partnership with Ukrainian Postal Service that I have just by chance with the head of the Ukrainian Postal Service. And
Maria, the sound is very bad. Maria, the sound is very bad. So we're going to have Ross share the slide about social action efforts. And if you want to log on again, and Ross, why don't you share the slide about social action efforts? And Maria, if you'll log on back again, she was having trouble with the Wi-Fi in her house. Rabbi Weissman, do you want to talk about this while we wait for Maria to log back in?
Yes, so there are a variety of ways for those of you who are interested in helping the relief effort to Ukraine. There are a variety of things that you can do. We all know that our heartstrings pull upon us to get our hands dirty, to bring supplies and goods. And so at the same time, it's very difficult to get supplies from the US over halfway around the world to Ukraine. And so in one way, the easiest and most effective and efficient way to help is to donate our shekels, our dollars, to great organizations like the Jewish Federation of North America, which is working with the Joint Distribution Committee, or the World Union for Progressive Judaism, to Magen David Adom. Those are opportunities where, with the swiping of a credit card or the sending of money, you can either give money for people to purchase supplies on the ground or replenish the supplies that have been purchased. And there are ways, if you do want to have more of a personal touch in your support, that you can buy supplies directly. There are a variety of organizations based in Ukraine who have put up stores on Etsy and on eBay where you can purchase things to support Ukrainian businesses. And Maria is going to share with us the supply drive that she has been leading through Amazon and other ways to get supplies from the U.S. and working through the logistics with their contacts with the Postal Service in Ukraine to help bring supplies over there. So, Maria, I see you. I think you might be back with us. Not quite yet. So while we're waiting for her internet to reconnect, right now you can go to our website and be connected to the Amazon wish list that Maria has created, where you can purchase medical supplies. Amazon will deliver those to a shipping facility in New Jersey. And with Maria's contacts with the Postal Service of Ukraine, they are being delivered to folks on the ground in and around Ukraine to help deal with medical emergencies that are there. When Maria reconnects in a few minutes, she's going to talk about the next phase of her project based here in Boca Raton. But at this time, we're going to move to our roundtable discussion, and I'm going to hand it back to Rabbi Dan Levin.
Thanks, Greg. And Maria, we hope that you can resolve your computer challenges as soon as possible. We're so inspired by your work and your efforts to try to bring relief. I'd like to ask Mark if he can share a little bit, just from your experience. Tell us, who are the Jewish community in Ukraine? What is their what is that group like? Is it a more homogeneous group? Is it a diverse group? What kinds of businesses do they run? What kinds of places and ways do they live in society? And what is it that they're leaving behind as they move into this new unfortunate status as refugees?
It is a complex and complicated and diverse community. It runs the gamut from very young to very old. As I noted earlier, it involves people who are seeking their Jewish identity by engaging in religious, cultural, educational, social activities. There are progressive congregations, Orthodox congregations. There are people in the middle class, solidly in the middle class. There are also Jews who are who are also oligarchs. When we visit Ukraine, which we do on a frequent basis, or when we did, we saw every facet of Jewish life that you could think of that would be available in the United States. But what's remarkable is all this has been done over the last 3 decades. One of the things that we take for granted is what we have enjoyed in this country and other countries in what used to be referred to as the West. The Ukrainian Jewish community has really been built over the last 3 decades. And what they have accomplished is nothing short of remarkable. The building of a social welfare network that includes Hesed centers that were started by JDC. You have community centers that offer every type of programming you could think of. This is truly a diverse and well-connected Jewish community. But the thing to remember is that there are still many more Jews who could be connected to this network and didn't have the opportunity. But our hope is that, one day in the not too distant future, they will have that opportunity again.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to come back to you in a moment. But Maria, I see you. If you can unmute yourself. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
We can. Your bandwidth is a little
Sorry.
low, but we can hear you. So Maria, can you just tell us a little bit about the work you've done in the last several weeks, and perhaps just tell us a little bit about your story in growing up and coming to the United States, and a little bit about your connection to Ukraine.
Well, let's talk about the work first, if everyone can hear me.
We can.
Okay, good. So our partnership is based with the Ukrainian Postal Service, and that gives us the infrastructure that we need to deliver all the products that are currently flowing into all the countries surrounding Ukraine. So we've been working directly with the Postal Service and awaiting for them to send planes into Poland, and a shipping company who is their partner has been receiving the medical supplies and packaging them accordingly and sending them to Poland. And then the Ukrainian Postal Service picks up in Poland in large trucks and sorts in Western Ukraine, and then delivers all over the country where things are needed. So the most important aid right now are medical supplies for them, very expensive, and because of all the injuries, they're running out of things all over the country. And they had asked us to think about the second wave of support, which would be essential humanitarian aid. It would be non-perishable goods. It would be hygienic supplies. It would be, things for babies, baby food, and diapers. They are getting a good amount of aid that's coming through Europe right now, through Romania, through Poland, through Moldova, Hungary. However, I think our role is to be the second wave, things that will be shipped in containers, which is a lot cheaper to ship versus air. Will be coming in once we start collecting, with a bit of a lag time, 2 to 3 weeks from this weekend when we open up. So, and that will be really important because it would be an additional wave of support that will be coming from people that are displaced, that have lost their homes. This is going to Ukraine, not to the evacuees or the refugees, directly to the people that are staying and have lost access to supply chains, have lost access to their homes, might be misplaced. So this will be really important and valuable to them in the next coming months. We have, thanks to an amazing Temple Bethel member, we have secured a vacant retail location. I can announce it publicly, which is right here in Central Boca, a North Military Trail next to all of you. And we will start collecting essential humanitarian aid donations as of this Saturday. I think we have given some information already. We're still working on digital materials and some marketing materials to have a big drive starting on Saturday, but we're hoping for a very successful drive of all these products. We will need volunteers and support from all the communities.
Thank you, Maria. I appreciate the incredible efforts, and especially the efforts to help people within Ukraine. So much of what I've seen is efforts, tremendous efforts by the international Jewish community to help those Jews who have left Ukraine. But of course, there are so many that remain in country and whose infrastructure is crumbling by the minute. So I think that's really important. Tell us a little bit, though, Maria, your story. How did you get to be from our Jewish community, a little bit about your connection to Ukraine?
So, I was born in 1974 in the former Soviet Union to a Jewish family that has very deep roots in Ukraine. My grandmother's side is from Kiev, and my grandfather's side is from a southern town of Kherson, which is the first fairly big town that fell into the Russian hands in the beginning of the war. And I don't know if you've seen videos, the people of Kherson have been on the streets protesting on a daily basis, stopping tanks with their bare hands. That area had a very thriving Jewish community for a number of years. They lost during the Holocaust as it was occupied by the Germans, but they have some hot blood in that southern Ukrainian area. So they're going to be fighting, and they're not going to stop. My connection to Ukraine, we left as political refugees. So we left the Soviet Union. Our family, had a hard time, as many other Jewish families, due to the state-sponsored anti-Semitism. Many doors were closed to us because of quotas for letting Jewish people in. I couldn't get into the top ballet school because for 50 girls that were being taken that year, they could only take one Jewish girl, and that Jewish girl was predetermined before I even tried. That's the information I received through my father. So those are the type of things on every corner that we kind of faced. And we had family in the United States that we wanted to reconnect with. And we made that decision in 1989 to immigrate. But I had stayed in touch with family. I have a cousin that lives in Kiev. Her name is Lata, and they are in Kiev currently with her husband Stefan and son Vlad. They are not willing to leave because men cannot leave at this point, and they do want to do something and help. So women are staying with men, and everyone is volunteering, sweeping the streets during the day, making tea and coffee for people. They live by the main square, the Independence Square in Kiev. And I have visited, I have some friends also from my childhood, and one of my best friends from my ballet school is in Kiev, and there was a huge explosion a mile away from her yesterday, and she said everything shook in her house. So we visited 3 years ago with my family. My husband is American, and it was important for my kids to go for the first time to Ukraine and see all of our roots, visit all the places where my family have lived and been, and cemeteries. We had a day of cemeteries, which I find extremely important. They get to see their family, and they feel extremely connected. Rabbi Dan, you bar mitzvah help Logan, and even in his speech, he talked about he walked into the main synagogue in Kiev, that he felt a sense of connection, like he's been there before. And that's the synagogue where Jews were really not allowed to go in during the Soviet time. And my grandmother, in secret during the high holidays, would stand around the corner. And she was worried that her name would be taken down and her children would get in trouble with the Communist Party. So a lot of Jews would walk by and not go in. So there's definitely a connection, and we watch what's going on in horror. We have a system with my family and friends around midnight our time.
Oh, Maria, I think we may have lost you. Thank you, Maria, so much. We hope you'll get reconnected. Kira, I'd like to ask you if you can reflect a little on your own childhood in Kiev, and also, what it's like to be literally with your family scattered around the globe, where you're here with us in South Florida. Your mother is a refugee living with a family friend in Leipzig, Germany. Your sister lives in Moscow. And I'm curious to know sort of what you are experiencing yourself individually and what you're hearing from your mother and your sister in these very different parts affected by the struggle and by the war?
So I don't remember that much from my childhood as Maria does. I do remember different small incidents, like being in the park with my grandparents, and someone said to his wife, "Let's leave, there are only Jews here." So I remember that was very confusing to me. I remember that I was doing a paper on Holocaust in high school, and there were different reactions in the class. So flashbacks like those. So yes, it's very challenging with my sister living in Moscow, because she has been there since she was 17. She went there to study at the university, and she stayed and has grown roots there. And right now she feels trapped because it's not easy to up and leave. There are a lot of strings attached, and at the same time she understands that she's alienated there because she's different. People there are fed lies every day in mass media. They do not realize, many of them, people who don't watch other channels other than Prime Russia channels, or look for a different sources of information, they do not realize everything that's going on. And when she tries to tell them to share the truth, many of them just don't believe. So it's not easy. At the same time, from Ukrainians, there is a lot of hostility towards people who live in Russia. So even among my friends, when I say a sentence that starts with my sister, there is a lot of tension. So that's definitely not easy.
I can imagine the whole situation is not easy. And for the three of you, maybe we'll start with Mark, and then Maria and Kira, maybe talk a little bit about the complex nature of what it is to be a Jew in Ukraine. Does the Jewish community think of itself as Ukrainian? Does it think of itself as apart from Ukrainian, as a Jewish community? The history of Jewish people in Ukraine is so difficult and layered and painful. On the one hand, Jews have lived in Ukraine for 1,000 years. It is the birthplace of Hasidic Judaism. You look at a map of Ukraine and you see these communities that are so synonymous with the birth of the richness of Hasidic culture. And at the same time, we can't think of Ukraine without thinking of the Shoah. We can't think of Ukraine without thinking of Babin Yar. It's so complicated. The history of anti-Semitism, which in so much is laden with the way I think our community thinks about Ukraine. And I'm curious to know of the Jewish people that now continue to live in Ukraine or who are fleeing Ukraine, do they think of themselves as Ukrainians? Are they tied up in the destiny of that country and its national story? Do they say, okay, well, we were never really at home there to begin with. We'll go make our home either in Israel or somewhere else in Europe, or maybe the United States. I'll touch on that in a moment, but curious to know from your own individual experiences. Mark, we'll start with you. What does the identity look like for the Jewish people in Ukraine?
Well, Rabbi, it's a very imposing question, and you talk about 1,000 years of history, which I'll try to do in about 45 seconds to answer the last part of your question. Jews have always had a complicated history in that part of the world, whether it was under Tsarist Russia, the Soviets, or even the modern day. Today, though, and I'm going to fast forward quite a few centuries, but before I get to that, both sets of my grandparents came from Ukraine. Although when they left at the turn of the 20th century, it was under the control of Tsarist Russia, and they thought of themselves not as Ukrainians, but as part of this Russian Empire that they needed to escape. And I was listening intently earlier. My mother's parents came from a shtetl, If anybody's familiar with the book, Everything is Illuminated, that was their shtetl. And if you saw pictures of them, you would say they were, pardon the expression, right off the boat. My father's parents had a different experience. They lived in the Kiev region, which was unusual in the late 19th century, early 20th century, because of Jews being restricted to what was known as the Pale of Settlement. But if you looked at them, they looked every bit of the part of any urban living couple at that time. But that didn't mean that they had an easier existence, because they were always seen as Jews. And the point that I want to make now is that's the big difference today. When the Soviet Union existed, everyone carried an internal passport. And in the upper corner of the passport, it listed your nationality. And for the most part, Jews were listed as Jews. They weren't seen as a member of a religious group, or it wasn't a religious identity, it was a national identity. But as you heard, that immediately led to discrimination in education, employment, where they could live, just in how they were treated. So something very unusual happened over the last 10 to 12 years, but particularly since 2014, after what's been referred to as the Maidan Revolution. And that's over the last 8 years. And think about it, it's only over the last 8 years. I mean, there are exceptions, but in the last 8 years, something unique has happened. Can't say how deep it is, it's very wide, but for the first time, Jews are comfortable identifying themselves as being Ukrainian and Jewish. What's also interesting is that Ukrainians, the larger population, for the most part, see Jews as Ukrainian and Jews. And I think part of that is because there were a number of Jews who were killed during the Maidan Revolution. They were manning the barricades in Independence Square. They were fighting for the independence of Ukraine, and a sea change took. But I don't want to oversimplify it or overstate it, because again, we're talking about a history of 1,000+ years versus what's happened not even over the last 30 years, over a very brief period of time. And we have to keep that in mind, because in the United States, 10 years, 20 years is considered ancient history. In the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, 10 years isn't even in the blink of an eyelash.
Right. And I think it's so interesting for us as Jewish Americans, I would say, especially among us who are non-Orthodox, we think of our identities as Americans who are Jewish Americans, but as Americans and proud Americans. But the notion of that Ukrainian identity, I think, is, as you say, a fairly new thing. Kira, I'm curious to know, for you, having grown up there and having a mother who lived her entire life in Kiev and your sister who lives in Moscow, how do they think of themselves in terms of their own national identities? Does your mom think of herself as Ukrainian? Does your sister think of herself as Russian? Or is Jewish, their Jewish heritage more the defining mark of their national identities?
I think for me it was a bit different, because my father was a researcher of Jewish history in Ukraine. So while I, for example, had a classmate who was kind of ashamed to say that he was Jewish, and right now he's Orthodox, by the way, which is interesting.
Always
for me, it was something natural that was part of my upbringing. As Mark said, it's more, I think for many people, it's more a matter of nationality than anything else. And I think it's a mix. Like myself, I'm Ukrainian, I'm Jewish, I'm Israeli, and I'm American. So there's a place for all of that inside of you.
Thank you. And Maria, I see you a little more stable now. So tell us a little bit of when you think of your own identity, your family as identity, and of your friends that you stay in touch with in Ukraine, how do they think of their own identities? Do they think of themselves as Ukrainians, as former Soviets, Jewish primarily? How does that sort of sit in the people that you know?
It's very complicated, and it has changed. I do agree. I feel the change that has taken place. When we came here over 30 years ago, we didn't even say the word Ukraine. And we would say either the Soviet Union, but many of us said Russian. And I would always add to it, but a Russian Jew. And when Ukraine became a country, slowly I transitioned to two versions. Either I'm a Jew from the former Soviet Union, or as Ukraine became more of a country, and probably 2008, the Orange Revolution, or maybe was it 2004? But after the Orange Revolution, I started saying I'm a Ukrainian Jew. So when people would say Ukrainian, I would always correct them and say a Ukrainian Jew. It's a little different than just Ukrainian. And very, very much correct. I think it was a number 5 after your first name, your father's name, your last name, your date of birth. Number 5 was your nationality. And I remember it was a document in school where people would say Ukrainian and Russian, and mine said Jewish. And I felt different. I want to say there were moments where I felt embarrassed in a way to be different. And I think as I got older, I became a little bit more defiant. And for when someone would say, oh, who's the Jew in your class? Or what are the Jews in your class? I would be one of the first people to stand up and say, that's me. So my relationship with that has changed. And now, especially lately, I caught myself dropping the Jew part when people ask, oh, Maria, aren't you from Ukraine? And I would say, yeah, I'm Ukrainian. And that Jewish part somehow has been dropped off. So it's very interesting because the pride in the country and its people. And I've seen how my family and my friends have integrated into the society. Jewish politicians have been elected. So it's a mixed bag for me. I do agree there's still anti-Semitism in Ukraine. You can't shake that. You can't shake that. It exists in Russia, in Moldova, in France, in England. There's still people that would hold those kind of beliefs. But I think overall the country is progressing in the future. And I think because they're all together collectively are Ukrainians. I kind of fell into that right now.
I hear that it's evolving even in the face of this war. We have just
Rabbi, can I just add one thing quickly?
I'm going to ask you to reflect on one quick thing, Mark. We just have a couple minutes left, which is of the Jewish refugees that have left Ukraine. Do they see, in terms of what their future holds for them, a desire to return to Ukraine, God willing, when the war will finish soon? Do they see Israel as their next destination, or Europe? Or would they, if the opportunity were available to come to the United States, would they welcome that opportunity? What do you hear from those who find themselves as refugees?
It's all of the above, but let me just take 15 seconds to add something to the previous question. What's been interesting, fascinating, what we've been tracking is President Zelensky was elected with 73% of the vote in a fair and open election. And what we've been tracking closely is to see how much blame has been directed toward him because he's Jewish. And but what I can tell everyone is that we haven't seen that. And that's what, in some ways it's fascinating that at the height of this war, that he's seen as the most unifying figure in the country right now. And he's not being singled out or criticized because he's Jewish. Now, the other question is that when I said all of the above, it is all of the above, is that as Rabbi Blake told us a couple of days ago in our webinar, most Ukrainian Jews that he's been in contact with on the other side of the border and in Ukraine see themselves as evacuees, not as refugees. They want to come they want to be able to return to their home. They're not sure what type of home they will have if they are able to return. Now, others are trying to get into Israel, and there's been an up and down process regarding that. Others want to come to the United States. Others want to live in Europe. One thing I would ask everyone on the call today is to write your members of Congress and urge them to get the administration to open up the borders, to adhere to the rules and regulations that are on the books to allow Ukrainians, either Jewish or of non-Jewish descent, to be able to enter the country. Because not everyone will have something to go back to. And we in the United States have to continue to play our part by providing humanitarian assistance, security assistance, but also being hopefully the open and welcoming country that we have been in the past.
And so I believe Secretary Blinken was even asked that at his news conference today about how quickly the administration was going to be able to move to provide refugee portals of entry for those who are fleeing the crisis and the war. I want to give a very, very special thank you to Mark and to all of the wonderful work that you're doing in your organization with the Jews of Eastern Europe, and especially our dear friend Jim Schiller for helping to arrange your participation with us this evening. And we're so grateful to have a congregation that includes such extraordinary people like Kira and Maria, in the midst of all the things that you have going on in your lives. The work that you're doing to try to bring help to the Jews of Ukraine is really remarkable. Maria has a bar mitzvah coming up in just a few weeks, and I hope that boy is practicing if he's not watching his mother. And Kira does so much to support the work of our congregation. We're very grateful. Just want to also send a very special thanks to my partners, Rabbi Jessica Mates and Rabbi Greg Weissman, and our incredible team at Temple Bethel for helping to arrange our panel tonight. But mostly, please, please, please visit Temple Bethel's website, tbeboca.org, and click on the link to help Ukraine. You can find all kinds of different ways where you can not only contribute funds, but as Maria said, we will continue to share information about where you can bring supplies so that we can fill that container quickly and send it off to be the next wave of relief. What often happens in the midst of a crisis is that we see a surge of help immediately, and then people get bored in our culture. And this is going to have to be a relief effort that will be long and sustained. We are really, really grateful to all of you for being with us. We wish you as happy a Purim as we can in these dark and difficult days, and an early Shabbat Shalom. Please look to Temple Bethel's website, tbeboca.org, for other ways that you can enjoy our congregation and our community with all the wonderful programs that we have, not only in person at Temple Bethel and Boca Raton, but things that you can enjoy online from wherever it is that you find yourself. Please, all of us, stay safe. May together we go from strength to strength.